All right, let's jump right in. We're going to talk about the incredible, almost totally forgotten story of a tiny volcanic island. An island that secretly became the arsenal for the American Revolution, and, for a brief shining moment, was one of the wealthiest spots on the entire planet.
So that brings up a really big question, right? How on earth did a tiny, barren rock, just 7 square miles, become the secret lifeline for a revolution? And not just that, but for a short time, the richest port in the world. It's a wild paradox, and we're going to unpack exactly how this little island pulled it off and why it all just vanished.
Okay, so to really get the story of this island, St. Eustatius, you first have to understand the people who owned it, the Dutch. Because back in the 17th century, they did something that was, well, kind of miraculous.
And I'm not kidding. Historians actually call this the Dutch miracle. Think about it. The Dutch Republic was this tiny country, not a lot of resources, not a lot of people, and yet somehow, by the middle of the 1600s, they controlled more of the world's trade than any other nation. It was absolutely mind-boggling for the time.
So what's really interesting is how they did it. Their strategy was totally different from their main rivals, the British. See, the Dutch were all about trade. They wanted to be the world's shipping middlemen, open for business with everyone. The British? Nope. They were all about building an empire, locking their colonies into a closed system where they could only trade with Britain. You can probably see where this is going. These two systems were on a collision course.
And that collision course I mentioned? Well, it came to a head in a big way during the American Revolution. When the colonies declared independence, they had a huge problem. They were completely cut off from their main supplier of pretty much everything, especially weapons.
The Continental Army was desperate for everything, but most of all for gunpowder. The answer, their lifeline, came from this little Dutch-owned rock called St. Eustatius, and its location was just perfect. It was a neutral, free port right in the middle of all these warring empires, Britain, France, Spain. It was the perfect spot for a secret marketplace.
And the trade that went on there, it was a work of art, really. American ships would pull in, packed with tobacco and indigo, and they'd trade it for all the stuff you need to fight a war. The profits were insane. We're talking over 120% on gunpowder alone. And they got real clever, hiding gunpowder in tea chests and rice barrels to sneak it past British ships. St. Eustatius wasn't just helping the rebellion, it was arming it to the teeth. All of this secret trade, this massive volume of goods, turned the island into a legend. People started calling it the Golden Rock. It was a place of almost unbelievable wealth and activity.
The famous British statesman Edmund Burke, he really nailed it. He called it a magazine for all the nations of the earth. It wasn't really a colony in the normal sense. It was more like a global superstore, a universal market where anybody could show up and buy or sell anything. Its only real defense was that it was just too useful to everyone.
And just let this sink in. This whole global phenomenon was happening on a rock smaller than a lot of city airports. Just 7 square miles. That's it.
The amount of business going through this place was staggering. In just 13 months, from 1778 to 79, almost 3,200 ships sailed out of this tiny little port. It was one of the busiest harbors in the entire world, just a constant frenzy of ships coming and going. But, St. Eustatius gave the Americans more than just guns. It gave them legitimacy. There was this moment that came to be known as the First Salute. An American warship sailed in and fired a salute, and the Dutch governor ordered the cannons at Fort Orange to fire right back. Now, this was a huge deal. It was the very first time any foreign power had officially recognized the flag of the brand new United States. For the Americans, it was this incredible sign of hope. For the British, it was the ultimate betrayal.
So this begs a really interesting question. How did this all actually work? I mean, in an age of deep national rivalries, who were the people that had the connections and, more importantly, the trust to link a revolutionary army in America with arms dealers all the way over in Amsterdam?
Well, decades before this all happened, the writer Joseph Addison gave us a hint. He talked about a certain group of people who acted like the pegs and nails of global commerce, holding the whole thing together. He was talking about the International Network of Jewish Merchants.
This merchant network was just uniquely built for this kind of work. They were spread out all over the world, but they shared a common language, customs, and, this is the key, a really high level of mutual trust that went beyond national borders. So while an English merchant and a Spanish merchant might not trust each other at all, this network could move goods between them without a problem. They were the glue in a very fragmented world.
And they were right at the center of the most valuable trades of the time. Sugar, tobacco, you name it. They practically had a monopoly on the sugar trade in the West Indies for a while.
So when the American Revolution needed a secret, reliable supply chain, this experienced global network was already in place, perfectly positioned to make it all happen through hubs like St. Eustatius. But you can't arm an empire's biggest enemy and expect to get away with it forever. The Golden Rock's incredible success made it target number one for a very, very angry Great Britain.
You can really feel the anger from the British side. Admiral George Rodney, who was in charge of the British fleet in the Caribbean, he didn't see a neutral port. He called St. Eustatius a nest of vipers and said that it was single-handedly keeping the American rebellion alive. He was convinced that to win the war, he had to destroy it.
And when the end came, it came fast. The British found a draft of a secret treaty between the Dutch and the Americans, and that was all the excuse they needed. In December 1780, Britain declared war on the Netherlands. Admiral Rodney got his secret orders, and just over a month later, his huge fleet just appeared on the horizon. The island had a tiny garrison, maybe 60 men. They surrendered without a single shot.
Rodney seized absolutely everything. The amount of loot was just unbelievable, valued at over £3 million sterling. That's like billions of dollars today. And he wasn't surgical about it. In his rage, he just took everything. Public property, private property, didn't matter if you were a friend or an enemy. He wanted to wipe the nest of vipers off the map for good. And just like that, the Golden Rock's amazing story was over.
The fall of St. Eustatius wasn't just some island's bad luck. It was a really brutal lesson in the clash between two very different ideas of how global power works. When you boil it all down, it comes to this. The Dutch model was fantastic for making money. It was quick, it was efficient, it was open to everyone. But here's the fatal flaw. It was incredibly vulnerable to military force. The British model, on the other hand, was all about building this integrated empire, backed by the most powerful navy in the world. It was slower, more expensive, for sure, but it was way tougher. And when push came to shove, the warship always beats the merchant ship.
And you can see how Britain won in the long run. They completely reoriented their entire economy. Over the 18th century, they shifted their focus dramatically away from Europe and towards the Americas. They built this huge, captive, integrated market for their goods that the Dutch, who were just focused on trade, could never compete with. Their empire became the engine for their industrial revolution.
And that kind of leaves us with a big question for today, doesn't it? When you look at the world now, you see places like Singapore or Dubai, these neutral trading hubs. But you also see powerful economic alliances like the European Union. Which model do you think is winning out? Is it the quick, nimble hub that trades with everyone? Or is it the massive, integrated bloc that gets to set the rules? The story of the Golden Rock shows us this is a debate that's been going on for centuries, and it's still shaping our world right now.